Good afternoon and welcome to our Thursday conversation at 2 p.m., Shape of the Museum. We've been gathering every week to talk to museum professionals about their practice, the changing trends within museums and within cultural institutions. I'm very excited that this week we're talking to Amirali Alibhai, Head of Performing Arts at the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. Before I introduce Amir, I want to begin with acknowledging where we operate, including in the digital space. The Art Gallery of Ontario and cultural institutions within the city operate on the territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Wendat. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably care for the land around the Great Lakes. This territory is also governed between an agreement between the Mississauga and the federal government of Canada. I'd like to now introduce Amirali Alibhai, who I hope you can now see on your screen, wearing a fantastic headpiece. Amirali Alibhai has been actively making and exhibiting visual, performance, and community-based arts for 25 years. His professional experience includes roles as a curator, educator, publisher, and administrator. Between 1996 and 2008, he helped establish the Roundhouse Community Arts Centre in Vancouver, where his role included developing artist and communities projects and coordinating cross-cultural partnerships. From 2009 to 2012, he was the executive director of the Greater Vancouver Alliance for Arts and Culture. He has previously served on many important boards, including the Canada Council for the Arts, the board of the Canadian Conference of the Arts, and the Provincial and Territorial Advisory Committee of the National Cultural Human Resources Council. He currently serves on the program advisory committees of the Arts Management Program at Centennial and the Music Committee of the Toronto Arts Council. He is Head of Performing Arts at the Aga Khan Museum. Welcome, Amir.
Hello. Hi. Good to see you.
Nice to speak to you.
Yeah.
I want, you have a beautiful home in the Aga Khan Museum, which is now just a little over 5 years old. Fantastic space in Don Mills, really the first of its kind in North America. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Aga Khan Museum is adapting in terms of the current landscape of COVID? I'm specifically thinking of hashtag Museum Without Walls.
Yeah, I think like a lot of institutions, we realize there's a need to keep connected with our audiences and to try and understand what the needs out in amongst our regular audiences, but also in our communities in general, what those needs might be regarding what it is that we do as museums. And to try and make that available, we can't do it physically. So looking at the online digital world, and I think a lot of us, no matter what discipline we're working in right now, have moved into that realm. And so that adjustment in the Museum Without Walls is a combination of archival material that we've, things that we've recorded, events, so the performing arts and lectures are some of those things. But we've also, prior to the situation, spent a lot of time documenting our exhibitions and with 3D cameras so we could do virtual walkthrough tours, and that was just fortuitous. And so we've been able to provide that as well, including of current exhibitions that we hope, will still be up when we open.
So, for example, you have had some blockbusters over the last few years, including Caravans of Gold and The Moon. Were those all captured in 3D virtual tours as part of your overall strategy?
Yeah, certainly The Moon was. Not all of them were. I mean, I think that like many institutions, not anticipating the situation that we're in, not everything was done in the way I now looking back would have hoped we had and, captured in terms of the detail. But it keeps us involved in creating new content as well, right? So it's not just about the archived material that we have, but we've had the opportunity, especially through social media platforms, to show the human face of the museum and the people that work in parts of the museum that are not often accessible or visible to the public when they come. So being able to hear from a conservator or being able to hear from the exhibition's installation manager and not always just about what their area of expertise is meant to be, but also perhaps their favorite object in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
So the other opportunity that we've had, which has been really quite wonderful, is for us to move slightly outside of our regular pre-COVID job descriptions. We've had to do that. You know, there's a word that starts with P that everyone uses these days. And I have another alternative. I think pirouette is maybe more performing arts based.
And for those who haven't heard it, the word he's referring to is pivoting.
Yes. So pirouetting, I don't know, maybe it's, in my mind, it's more elegant because, you know, if you pivot too much, you get dizzy and fall down, right? Anyway, I think that being able to change our focus and look at, you know, really ask ourselves why we're here. I mean, we've had to do some introspection.
So this is the big question, and I'd love to hear from the Aga Khan, from you and the Aga Khan team. What are the conversations about what the role of the museum is today in this reflective moment? What is coming up in those internal conversations with you and your team?
Well, I think that the focus on community, on, you know, our role and place within a community, not just a physical community anymore, but there's now this increasingly more important and in some ways communities that we're discovering that are online communities. And they can be anywhere in the world. So there's this strange, you know, on one hand, there's this, we're returning to our families and our homes. There's this kind of, I don't know, maybe potentially xenophobic moment. But there's also at the same time this opportunity to share quite widely and hopefully in, you know, in as accessible a way as is possible right now.
I'd like to come back to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I'd like to come back to the idea of kind of progressing and widening versus retreating. But before I do, and for our audiences, you were part of, you came from Vancouver to be part of the establishment of the museum. Can you give people a sense of your own background and your role in opening up the Aga Khan?
Well, you know, my area was performing arts or living arts. And that came out of this need and this desire from the founders of the museum to not just deal with the material culture of the Islamic world and Islamic civilizations, because that's the focus of our collection, but to move really broadly beyond that and look at, okay, how do cultures and communities and different perspectives actually work together? So the broader aegis of our mission and mandate has been pluralism and celebrating our cultural diversity. And not just celebrating, I mean, I use that word, I didn't mean to. I don't like to often use the word just celebrate, but certainly to explore and to examine the, and to facilitate the dialogue between creators and audiences, you know, across disciplines, across cultures. The idea of putting the best of what we're finding as curators, as programmers for our audiences, and making sure that it's not just the master sitar player, but Haydn is there too. And, you know, there has to be.
So fostering intercultural dialogue in partly who you choose to pair in your programs and how you choose to frame your exhibitions.
Absolutely. I mean, the exhibitions very often have a focus or historically that is specific, but we also do contemporary work as well. So we try to bring that contemporary work into dialogue with the collection or with historic work. So it's a dialogue across time and cultures and geographies. And so I think that, you know, as we were developing the museum, the idea was that we wanted to be about, you know, even at the establishment, about communities and bringing people into relationship with one another around art and using the arts as a way to create those understandings, to actually actively counter xenophobia and, you know, isolation and to support curiosity.
Do you feel that role is more important now, for example, in light of the, you know, obviously COVID has also brought up a lot of challenges around xenophobia and in community. You're situated in a very specific community. Have you found your outreach to the local community in Don Mills has grown post-pandemic, or what efforts are being made to connect?
We, you know, I think the two aspects of our online presence, the social media aspect and the website, and you know, when we first started out, it was all messy. It was like one thing, like social media was being used to actually develop content, right? The DIY aesthetic, you know, that we've all become used to, artists performing from their living rooms and stuff. I mean, it's been really interesting to see that aesthetic develop and be accepted. It's the, you know, there's certain things that we've accepted in recent weeks that have been, you know, the value of work. People are getting a lot of content for free, and artists are not being paid. And, or if they're being paid in whatever people can afford. You know, there's a whole kind of situation going on in that world. There's also the situation with the museum and its own resources, you know, and funding. I mean, revenue streams. We're all facing those same challenges.
Yes.
And so trying to find out how we, you know, connect to the local. I mean, we've been following our data, and we're noticing that social media, in particular, most people are within a driving or, you know, commuting distance from the museum that are participating in that. We're finding that some of the more formal activities, such as a virtual tour, that's a more international kind of
Audience.
An audience,
Interesting.
right? So the social media, especially when they're calls to action, you know, send us pictures, send us drawings, things that you do with your family, those sorts of things that often happen on social media platforms, you know, that's growing.
We're finding similar things.
Yeah.
I just want to remind audience, please send us your questions. There's, I believe, a Q&A chat box, and we'd love to hear from you. Amir, that's kind of around your digital strategy and reach with community. And you stated earlier that a big part of the role of the museum within Mandate in Your Eyes is connecting to community. There's also been a lot of conversations around a trend amongst cultural institutions that this may be a moment of regression. So some people are saying this is a moment of opportunity for systemic change. Some people are saying actually this is a moment of retrenchment. What do you think is going to be happening within the cultural space in terms of what is the opportunity right now for museums and cultural institutions?
Well, despite my headdress, I'm not clairvoyant.
It's
but
quite a feat.
but I think that both those things are going to happen depending on the institution's mandate, its age, its history. I mean, museums are colonial structures, right? They come out of that whole place, right? So, and in recent years, we've seen that change, you know, and be challenged, and them evolving into places for communities, places where people can engage with ideas and objects and stories, right? So I think that still needs to continue to be developed, but we do have the opportunity to do that in different media, and to do that also differently in person, because I mean, we hope to open soon and to welcome people back into the physical space, because that space was built, that architecture, that structure that we inhabit was built for that purpose. It was built to bring people together. And now we have to figure out how to choreograph that in a way that is safe, that people feel confident that they're going to be safe, that they can have an experience with live artists and live art.
Can you give us an inkling? I mean, we're in the same conversations at the AGO about how your program will shift as you begin to reopen. Do you have a sense of kind of what you're seeing in terms of global strategies around engaging once doors are open?
Well, you know, I think that we're not the only institution thinking about this, but the idea of controlling the volume of people, the numbers of people in various spaces so they can be safe, providing signage the way we see in many public spaces that we attend now that show us, you know, through the markers on the ground often, you know, where we should be standing and how far away. Making, you know, I feel more confident when I'm in a place where that I know is clean and being regularly cleaned. You know, and so a lot of that has to become visible, I think, to visitors. I think that people will the idea of timed tickets.
Yeah.
Admission, I mean, people are struggling. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people have less
Disposable income or income at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, we would consider being discounted or free when we reopen.
What's your current admission model?
The current admission model is we have friends of the museum that once they purchase that annually, they can attend as many times as they want for free admission. We have a couple of our galleries that are open, whether you pay admission or not, always. And then there's the paid galleries. And so there's an individual, adult, student, senior pricing on that. And so that's an important source, a significant source of revenue for the museum, and helps, you know, keep the lights on and the heat up. And, you know, so that, but that is something, you know, again, it's going back to that question, why are we here? It makes no sense for us to not be accessible.
Right.
Right. Otherwise we can't fulfill our mission, and that makes it, in my experience, risky. Risks are raison d'être, right? You know, we exist for a particular purpose, and, you know, maybe that purpose has to be, of course we're looking at it, and, you know, the idea of rebuilding is very important, because it is a rebuild. As you said, you have a much longer history at the AGO, but we've been around for 5 years, a little more, almost 6. We've worked really hard to establish a certain identity and rhythm and way of working. And now we've realized that this isn't just about pirouetting. This is about starting from scratch. The thinking has to start from scratch, right?
You're not alone in that. I'm going to change tack for a quick question, but I think for a quick moment, but I think we have a question that's come in from Lauren Schwartz. You've made me think about museums and galleries as colonial institutions, and how colonialism, like everything else, has the potential to change into something good and something that might foster relationships and bring people together. In what way do you see your gallery moving in that direction?
I think it's really about, you know, again, I think most museums have moved beyond that original initial place where we come from, which is a good thing. Evolution is a good thing. And I think that where we try and make, notions of excellence are very much tied into power, right?
Interesting.
Right, and so historically, I think notions of excellence have been a powerful tool used by colonizers, or you know, I think that it's looking at those notions of excellence, and for me to be able to sort of put on the same stage within a season, you know, a mastered classical Drupad singer from India, right, who is at the, you know, who represents the peak of musical practice in that culture, and have an opera singer perform on the same stage within the same season it says, in my humble opinion, it says a lot about excellence. It says a lot about value systems. It says a lot about, and we're not making a judgment.
You're
Right?
just presenting.
We're just presenting. But we're saying that, hey, you know, we have limited things that we can present. We're making choices all the time about what we present. Right? Curators do that. Programmers do that. We do that in our everyday lives. We choose, right? And those choices, you know, are so layered and depend on so many assumptions. And so I like to have that surprise in the programming. You know, I want someone to say, okay, why'd they do that? Right?
Understood.
Yeah.
Another question from Akshata. How do museums see the new immigrant stories, artists, and or changing demographics being represented in these institutions alongside their historic representations? Very interesting, especially in a city like Toronto.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, one of the strategies that we're exploring and we have explored in the past is actually seeking responses and also working with communities to create exhibitions. So we did an exhibition with newcomers from Syria a while back.
What was that called, Amir?
It was called Syria, A Living History. And it was curated by Dr. Phyllis Shucker-Phillip at the museum. She involved contemporary artists in that exhibition along with historic works. So, you know, objects as old as 3000 BC or BCE and objects as recently as, you know, within the year. So there was again, notions of excellence and language and not ossifying something historically and saying, oh, it was great once, right? Or here's, that there's a continuity and evolution in that culture. I mean, that was one objective, but we also had a part of it that was a photo-based project that we worked with newcomer families who were telling their stories, and that became incorporated into this exhibition. It was a very powerful step, and it actually led to another exhibition which I curated called Syrian Symphony, which was working with contemporary artists responding to the horrible and continuing violence and war in Syria.
In Syria.
Yeah.
That I'm very glad you answered that question. It's interesting, as you said, to kind of look at the historic versus newcomers, especially within Toronto. You yourself obviously come from an immigrant background, as do I, Punjabi. Did you grow up in Vancouver? I don't remember. Are you
from the age of 9 to the age of almost 50? Yeah.
And you've done so much work around kind of leadership in the arts. It's community-based, but also BIPOC leadership in the arts. And I think you and I have talked a little bit about this. There's huge trends and efforts around inclusion and diversity within cultural institutions, and especially kind of historic cultural institutions across the world. What are your thoughts on kind of on shifting and increasing BIPOC leadership in the arts? Because I think one of the fears during this pandemic as well is the potential to retrench.
Well, I think it's an opportunity. I mean, and you're right. There is that danger to retrench. And that happens, historically, we see that. And it will happen for some institutions. I'm hoping that most institutions, however, are able to see this moment as an opportunity to actually move that agenda forward. Because again, given our institution and the value placed on pluralism, what is that? How is that different from multiculturalism? How is that different from some of the models we've had in the past? How can that be different? And I think that it's very much about understanding that we have much to learn from one another, and that the perspectives, it's like, symphonies were the first places where you saw people of color on stage
Mm-hmm.
in the West, playing Western music, but they were playing Western music,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now's the time to allow them, and of course, I'm not pretending this hasn't happened. Of course, this has happened already, but inviting composers from other cultures, that happened, right? To collaborate with the symphony, the Western Symphony, and to create new works that way. The work that Yo-Yo Ma did and continues to do with the Silk Road Ensemble, and bringing composers from Azerbaijan and other parts of the world to compose works for instance. So there's a lot to learn from one another, and I think that the perspectives the perspective, I can only speak for myself, the perspective I bring as someone with my cultural background and experience to the work I do in the cultural sector, I've always tried to make sure that it's there, that it manifests itself somehow in that work, either as an artist or as a curator, and even as an administrator.
And what about, and the examples you've given are within programming and presentation and public facing forward. What are your thoughts kind of within the internal structures of cultural institutions? Because my first thought goes to recruitment and strategic recruitment to open doors to communities that may not have been necessarily had a history of being trained or be in leadership positions in certain spaces. What are your thoughts on the internal side?
Well, I think that it's important to address representation of perspectives. It's like skills. It's when you're hiring personnel for a cultural institution, you're looking for particular skills as a job description, right? Mm-hmm. I think that what if we're a little more three-dimensional about how we think about a job description, and we've heard a lot of talk in recent years about the soft skills, right? As well as the hard skills that someone needs to bring to any given position. And we also talk about, many institutions talk about being committed to equity in their hiring practices. But I think we also have to think about, what do we need institutionally in terms of a perspective and a way of thinking? Right, this person might be able to bring, because you can't assume that just somebody is a person of color that they're going to actually bring, anything different than what already exists. It depends on their training, it depends on their personality, it depends on what their interests are. And I think that that's fair, but I think that that's not something new. I think it's something to keep in mind and to think, I really get frustrated with ghettoizing and putting people of, you'll see, so if I were to do a fantasy global music festival, that global music festival would have indie rock and would have hip hop and would have sitar players and would have jazz musicians and, multiple disciplines, if you want, or might, within music. But I would want to make sure that I had rock and roll and soul and gospel as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, why separate it out? Why? I want you to see all people. I want you to see, the entire range of human diversity on the same stage, if you want.
No.
Right?
Interesting. No, it's good to get a sense of your kind of your programming views. I'm going to take a question. What steps is the museum considering to reach out to other Muslim communities in the GTA, for example, Southern Philippines, Ethiopia, to counter some of the xenophobia in the larger community that you've mentioned?
Well, I think that is something that is an ongoing challenge. Within the greater Muslim communities known as the Ummah. Very often we've tried to, and because of it's easier to do in performing arts because you can program multiple artists within a season, whereas with exhibitions, of course, there are much longer view in terms of even development, but and put, once they're up for a long time. So it's perhaps how you engage with those exhibitions or performances, reaching out. Very often the way I try to do that as a programmer is by booking artists that will bring an audience, so for
From those
instance,
specific communities. I mean, it's interesting, the reference to Ethiopia and the southern Philippines.
well, and I haven't really thought about the southern, I'm glad to have this brought to my attention, because now I'm going to be more aware and look for those specific communities.
Mm-hmm.
But the Indonesian community often gets forgotten
Within the Muslim world,
within the Muslim world.
Yeah.
And so I'm planning to do an interview with Amirali Faisal, who is a contemporary performance artist who was exiled from Indonesia at one time and now is back working in Bali. And so, I'm trying to have a conversation with her, and that would be an example of a way that I thought we could bring that community into focus through our programming. And then, we need to do outreach specifically to that community. And
Amir, you're not going to have, I don't know this, but I'm assuming all your work is often showed in a 400-seat theater that's specialty built.
300-seat theater, 350. Yes, I mean, I had so many cancellations. I've had to move things. I've had to readjust things. Travel, because most of my artists in a season are international artists, has become a huge unknown.
So how will your program, how are you re-envisioning a program without a theater in this time? Because obviously there's a lot of conversations. We have a theater too in terms of Jackman Hall, of distant seating. A large performance space in Berlin opened today, and they had literally taken out seats between to create space. One is, how are you envisioning a theater-based season? And secondly, how is the exhibition program going to shift after this?
And those conversations are going hot and heavy every day. I can speak more directly to the performing arts and the theater aspect of the museum because of my role there. And I think that, we certainly are looking at smaller live performances, because I think at the same time as we're all discovering that digital content is here to stay, and it's going to continue to evolve. And most of us will continue to be engaged in this way, because I think we've learned a lot from the value of doing this work. But that live experience, I think, is going to become even more special, even more valuable for people. I mean, I can't wait to go see a show.
Yeah, you've been.
I don't know, and I know a lot of people feel the same way. And I'm tired of the online stuff. But so creating hybrid forms where we're able to have 50 people, 100 people gather safely, given the health regulations.
So small, bespoke, social distance-based live experience is what
exactly. And then we also have to think about the artists and the crew. Doing a festival, I mean, you have to sterilize the microphones in between artists now, right? Like, that's another thing. And I mean, how do you do that in an effective way? And so there's so many things that we're now thinking about institutionally to make that the experience that we do provide when we open. And the only way we've been able to do it is to set a hypothetical date for when we're going to open, not knowing when we're going to open exactly, making it soon enough that it makes us all kind of aim for that.
On the ready.
On the ready, so that we can, that when we're given permission, that we can invite and rebuild our institution with the community and with our audiences, because we don't exist without our audiences in any case. So, they've kept us alive through this time, through their engagement with us online.
And you've maintained it with your digital content as we are right now in this
as
conversation.
many of us have, and that's why it's been so important. But we need to, rebuild.
A question from Robert. When you talk about hybrid events, do you see tickets for attending the live events and tickets for the same event as streamed? And this is a conversation we're also starting to have, which is what is the monetization within the digital space? What does ticketing look like for a live experience versus an online experience?
Well, I can tell you what I think personally about that, because we haven't made decisions about this institutionally, but I've made my perspective known, and that is, I think that we need to charge for the live experience, of course, and we have to also decide, what, because I think who's in your audience is going to be important. If you're recording something, like it has to be, it has to be fans of that artist. It has to be an audience that really wants to be there, right? And so I think paid tickets for that makes sense. I think this monetization of the online, I think live streaming is probably not the way to go. My experience with live streaming is that too many things can go wrong, and they often do. The technology is not, it's great, but it's not where it needs to be. Our resources wouldn't allow us to create that value, and I think a lot of...
You're already creating pocket performances on a weekly basis.
Yeah, but again, that's an aesthetic that's developed, that people, again, the audience, myself, we expect that stuff for free.
Okay.
So what are you going to pay for is the question.
So you're talking about a pre-recorded full
I think,
performance.
like the examples we've seen out there that the Metropolitan Opera has been doing for years, right? Mm-hmm. It's that very produced experience for an audience, which often the Met ones, you're seeing them with other people, but you're seeing behind the scenes. You're getting that extra value. You're seeing close-ups where if you bought a ticket to actually see the opera, you'd never see that detail. You'd never. So we have to think, I think, in terms of what we're capturing and what we're producing. It has to be something people will be willing to pay for, right? And I think that we all do that sort of work, but it's not just a matter of pointing a camera at it and live streaming it on Facebook. I don't think anyone's going to pay for that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Another one from viewers. Do you anticipate this situation pushing larger institutions to think more local than global at this point in terms of content, as getting international artists would be difficult, obviously, because of travel? As a programmer, how has your research changed?
Yeah. So, I often like to see bands live before I book them or work with them. Now I'm looking and relying more on online content. I'm watching.
Well, ISPA, the International Society for Performing Arts, just announced their pitch session going digital, obviously. It would normally be a gathering of many presenters.
WOMEX, the World Music Expo, which happens annually, and I've attended every year. I don't think I'm going to be attending this year, and I'm not sure it's going to go ahead either. There are many other, the Global Toronto, that Small World Music is developing, that was meant to be a global music showcase and conference in Toronto, was at first postponed, and now it's moving onto an online format for its, so people are trying to find solutions. And so it's really changed the way one does research. What's really been important is keeping in touch with colleagues and networks around the world, because very often, we have other curators, other programmers, other artists that we trust, who may have relationships. They may have seen this artist So I'm receiving more proposals like that. I'm getting things out of the blue that I'm able to look at and be a little bit objective about it, because I'm not watching something digital that I'm imagining live. I'm watching something digital that's going to be digital.
Right. So in answer to this question, which is, do you think your programming will shift to be more local? I'm assuming because of air travel, you're actually saying there may be a focus on local, but you'll continue to book internationally, but it'll be online.
Yes, and when travel allows, or if it's affordable, you know, then, I mean, just imagine it, if the regulations were as they are now, someone traveling, even if we could get them to come in from somewhere, is probably paying a huge premium on that travel, or we're paying a huge premium, and then they're supposed to quarantine for 14 days.
Right, right, of course.
Right. So how do you do that?
You do a mixture of online, you create this hybrid.
But I think local artists,
system.
again, as I said earlier, they've been, you know, so many of them are my friends and colleagues, and they've been hit so hard. All the live musicians I work with, their gigs have completely dried up, right? So, you know, as much as we can, we'll continue to do those programs that engage those artists, and, you know, where we can provide them platforms that are online as well as live.
To finish off, I just want to go back a little bit more to the kind of philosophical, strategic questions around the role of museums, which is, you started in terms of community. Do you think museums will play an even more important role in terms of fostering community post-pandemic than before? And what do you wish to see going forward in the next 5 years within the sector?
I mean, I think museums can become relevant to people if they're relevant. You know, if what they're presenting resonates with people. We can't really predict that, right? But I think that also speaks to how we are in the world, how we reach out. I mentioned, you know, a simple thing like accessibility in terms of the cost of attending, or, you know, we're thinking of emulating what is going on right now with seniors having preferential times to go shopping.
Yeah. Nice.
So maybe we have a time like that for seniors. You know, or frontline workers, or, you know, and again, it depends on how the situation itself evolves, right? I think people, I'm a person, I want to get back out there and have, you know, I know it's going to be a different world, but, you know, being able to be in the world and to be social, we're social people. I miss being with other people, right?
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for coming. We have more talks next week. On Tuesday, we have the pleasure of speaking to Janet Cardiff and George Miller about their practice in this period of downtime. We have so much going on. Actually, sometimes I can't remember our full schedule. Like you, with Museum Without Walls, we have AGO from Home. We have Tanya Talaga on Tuesday speaking about work that inspires her in this moment, specifically a piece of Rebecca Belmore's from our exhibition, Facing the Monumental. So please tune in to our programming and to the Aga Khan Museum's programming. Also Franklin Simran's, I'm getting prods from the team, which is great, in conversation next Thursday. So thank you again, Amirali, and I hope you stay well.
Thank you, you too, thanks.
Bye-bye.